Hello everybody, this is Shumallo coming to you from $0 Security. I'll be taking this course on malware development. This is the first video of the course. We would discuss the different types of malware out there, and I'd let you know some basic information about it and how you can understand if you have been infected by one, or how you can classify different kinds of malware based on their behavior and other patterns that they follow during an infection. During this course on malware development, I'd go on to other topics in future videos like the history of malware, and I discuss a very important advanced malware as a case study. I discuss hammer toss, um, which would give you an insight into some practical malware development. And then I'd do a video where I'd show you how to gain some um, experience with a post-exploitation framework like Metasploit. And finally, we will do a short hands-on course on how to develop your own malware in some simple programming languages like C or C++. So, a lot of things out there. Let's get started right away. So, this is a video on the types of malware and the various kinds of offensive software out there, and also we discuss in some ways how defensive softwares like anti-malwares or antiviruses can understand if your computer has been infected by one of these, or how you yourself can understand if you have been a victim to one of these kinds of malware. So let's get started. So the first kind of malware we are going to discuss is a virus. Just a note in the beginning, often people use the word virus and malware interchangeably. Technically, I just point out that it's not the correct usage of terminology. A virus is a type of malware, but as we see in the course, as we go on, you would encounter that malware is a rather broad umbrella term for all kinds of malicious software out there. So be careful when you use terms like that on the internet to justify your program or do some write up on a code. So a virus is essentially a program that has an ability to inject itself within legitimate programs or code running on the system and replicate. These are the two characteristics of a virus you would be looking at essentially. Uh, a virus may be a benign joke, or it may have a malicious intent like sabotage. Usually a virus is not connected to a network, or it usually isn't targeted to attack something that's connected to the internet, because a virus usually targets local storage devices or file systems that are on the computer at that point of time. um, so if you have a virus infection and you have some pen drive that's attached to a computer, and you take the pen drive and you put it in another computer that's not uh, been infected by the virus, you could spread it potentially to that machine. So much like a biological virus, this spreads when you uh, pass on something that's contaminated by the infected party to another person that's not contaminated. Um, These are one of the most legendary types of malwares, and one of the first uh, malicious softwares that came out on the uh, internet, so as to say. These have been there even before the internet was even conceptualized. You see an example here, that's the elk cloner. This was there in the 1980s, I guess, where you didn't have internet as you have it today. Um, so viruses essentially have been a legend in malwares, and in the next video on the history of malwares, I would discuss certain famous viruses which have taught us a lot about how this field has developed. Um, a virus is categorized by the area of the code is it uses essentially to replicate, like a boot sector virus, or a vector in which the virus travels, like a macro virus. Viruses are easily detected by code signature or behavioral analysis by an antivirus software, and perhaps these are things you should be on the lookout for if you have downloaded something of the internet that looks suspicious. But viruses are not the most dangerous kinds of malware out there. As you go on in the course, you would see that there are a lot of things which perhaps cause more havoc than a virus. So the next kind of malware is a worm. A worm is characterized by the fact that, unlike a virus which replicates on disk, a worm replicates on a network. Even before the internet, we have had worms which have traveled over the ARPANET. The ARPANET was a predecessor of the internet, and even then we had programs which would replicate themselves from systems which are connected on a network and would travel essentially from one computer to another over the network. So worms do not target local storage, but they do target uh, network connections. You would not have a risk of being infected by a worm if you haven't connected to your computer to the internet ever. Unlike a virus, a worm does not spread through pen drives or CDs that have been attached to the machine. Um, these two are known to be one of the earliest classes of malware out there. The example you see over here is the Morris worm. It's the first time someone was uh, prosecuted for a cyber attack, and worms do constitute one of the earliest known and documented malicious cyber attacks that had caused a lot of financial loss. Um, Worms do report back since they are on a network, and they would usually report back to the hacker with some information regarding the system. Uh, Worms again could be benign, or they could have a malicious payload. They could slow down the system. So yeah, worms were the first kinds of malware out there which seem to have a significant impact on a large number of computers at once. Essentially, a virus cannot travel if there is no contamination between the devices through some file or some file sharing system that requires human intervention. But worms can travel without human intervention. We have had some worms which have traveled over the internet without ever being encountered by uh, human beings to do anything with it. So yeah, worms are one of the deadliest kinds of malware out there. But again, these two can be detected by behavioral analysis, and most antivirus softwares or anti-malware softwares are capable of detecting such wounds. The next kind of malware we're going to discuss is a Trojan, or a Trojan horse, as it's better known. A Trojan horse is simply a software that misguides the user to execute a payload on the system, unknowingly showing itself as something that's harmless and something the user would be tricked to execute or open without suspicion. So a Trojan is essentially a piece of stealth software, and it's a part of a social engineering attack mostly, when a person is tricked into executing a Trojan on the system which delivers a malicious payload. Unlike a virus, a Trojan does not replicate and it does not spread, so a Trojan is used to target a client and exploit the client machine in a very targeted fashion. It doesn't spread over the network or spread through storage devices essentially. So if you are infected by a Trojan, it's because the hacker usually wants to target your machine only, but it's not uh, concerned about that virus spreading to a very large number of clients. So a Trojan is essentially a part of something that you have downloaded knowingly, thinking of it as something which safe, but actually it's not. So usually antiviruses can use a sandbox, or they may also recognize famous signatures of Trojans, or this may simply understand these kinds of malware like Trojan horses with behavioral analysis, and may help to contain these kinds of malware. So these are essentially used for and to exploit endpoint machines in a wide variety of ways, but they are not used to cause havoc on a very large scale, but they could be used by a hacker to gain access, or they could be used by someone to execute something on a specific machine, or only those machines which it targets its software to be distributed on. Moving on, we come to a class of malware known as bots or botnets. Botnets are a hybrid piece of malware that's essentially a crossover between a virus and a worm. So a botnet is connected to the internet, but that's not the way it spreads from a computer to another. A botnet may also spread through physical devices. It may also be a part of a malicious script that's running on a website, and if you visit that website, that script may get executed on your machine and infect you with the botnet. So they can be used for information theft, they can be used for DDoS attacks, they can be used in a wide variety of ways where the hacker essentially needs resources connected to a network, and this is essentially something that's been out there for quite a long time. You could read about a lot of botnets like the Pony botnet, and you'd find essentially interesting case studies. Botnets are still very much in use today in the industry, and you should always be on the lookout when you are visiting sites which appear suspicious for such kind of infection. Next up is a ransomware. So ransomware is a malware that encrypts all the information and data on the disk and demands ransom in some cryptocurrency to decrypt that information for the user. A ransomware could be a huge financial leverage for the hacker, and it's known to cause havoc across many personal computers or even corporate industries. Attacks as recent as the WannaCry attack in 2017 have indeed proved how deadly such malwares can be. The next kind of malware that we're going to discuss is a cryptominer. So, a cryptominer isn't essentially harmful for your device because it doesn't steal your information or cause much of a havoc, but still, this could potentially have some financial leverage for the attacker. So, as you might know, that mining is a concept that's associated with cryptocurrency, where a person may use his resources and be a part of the ledger network and verify transactions on the cryptocurrency network, helping in the growth and development of that blockchain system. But mining also comes with a perk, that is, if you are a part of that blockchain network, you earn very small amounts of that cryptocurrency as you verify certain transactions and contribute to that network. Often attackers use cryptominers to do a kind of attack called cryptojacking, where he installs such executables or makes the victim execute malicious scripts on a website that the victim visits in order to gain access of some of the victim's resources and use that to mine cryptocurrency for his own benefit. Cryptominers are often recognized and detected by anti-malwares by monitoring what is traveling on the network of a system or simply by behavioral analysis. Though these aren't essentially harmful or cause very first-hand harm, but still these could slow down the system by a very good amount because mining is very resource exhaustive, and thus they might in a way cause distress to the victim on the other side. So an adware is a piece of malware that is that advertises or produces very annoying pop-ups on screen. You surely have come across some adware if you have downloaded some things of the internet and you find software or you find such services which are installed silently on your computer even though you haven't really opted for them. Adwares can be very annoying and sometimes can even be harmful as they endorse fraud or phishing attempts and also could have some financial leverage for the attacker as he might gain some money whenever you click such ads posted by a adware. So a spyware is a malware that's designed only for information theft. It's characterized by either keyloggers or data loggers which are present on a system and often steal sensitive information and pass it over to the attacker over something which would not raise suspicions. It could be an email which the program sends from the computer to a email address that's designated by the attacker. It essentially does it in some way that the network defender will not um, classify as suspicious. Often spywares are a part of social engineering attacks where the attacker wants to know certain uh, sensitive data or wants to gain access over systems where the client has some access to with a password or a username, or it could just be to steal a large number of uh, passwords from infected systems. So something that sets the spyware apart from all kinds of malware is the potential damage that it can cause to personal information. Uh, Often, if a victim has some account or some web service which he or she has access to with a password or something like a credit card number, a spyware would be able to intercept these information even though they are transmitted in an encrypted fashion over the network. So they don't essentially um, take the data from the network. That it's not a man in the middle kind of an attack. Rather, spywares directly record data from the keyboard, and therefore, even if your data is encrypted or your passwords are encrypted when they're saved on disk, spyware still may be able to get that information and pass it over to the attacker. Next up is a wiper, and as the name suggests, this is one of the most simplest kinds of malware out there. When it infects a system, it cleans the hard disk beyond recovery. This is used purely for sabotage in an industry, and uh, essentially when a wiper infects your system, if it's not properly screened by an anti-malware, this would render your system useless and delete everything on it from files to even the operating system. Next up is backdoors and rootkits. A backdoor is essentially a piece of software that could let the hacker have some control over your system. A rootkit is a type of backdoor which gives the hacker full access over your system and the ability to run commands or search for files or conduct interactive ops on your system. Usually, such backdoors or rootkits are associated with uh, some sort of a command and control network like Metasploit or Covenant, which the hacker uses on his machine on a team server to control any infected client. These are one of the most advanced kinds of malware out there, and they could potentially turn out to be devastating as rootkits and backdoors operate very silently and stealthily, and antiviruses have to often use network defending techniques like packet analysis or analyzing traffic over the internet to find out if these kinds of infections have occurred on the system. So till now we have discussed mostly malwares which could act as payloads. I mean, these malwares directly have some malicious intent and execute them on the target system and pass on information. The next two kinds of malwares that we are going to discuss aren't essentially malicious on their own. Rather, they carry these malicious payloads over to infected systems. They are bootkits and droppers. So first, what's a bootkit? Well, as the name suggests, the bootkit is something that activates on boot. That means it executes the payload and loads it on the system even before the operating system has started up. That is, during the boot process of the machine. So, any antivirus present on the operating system is essentially opaque to these kinds of payloads which a bootkit executes. Bootkits today are often recognized and evaded using secure boot techniques by UEFI and certain other methods where the firmware used during booting can be scanned for these kinds of infections to be present. A bootkit most famously targets the MBR or the master boot record of the system to load itself stealthily into it and get executed during the boot process. The final kind of malware that we're going to discuss is a dropper or a downloader. So, like I said, these malwares are the intermediate step between the hacker and the real payload that the hacker wants to execute. You may find that a dropper is very similar to a Trojan horse. In fact, it is. A dropper is just an advanced Trojan infection on the system. When we discuss Trojans, you would remember that um, the Trojan has a payload built into it. But a dropper could have that, or it could even have a system where the attacker may choose to just execute the dropper on the machine and then remotely load the payload from the team server or his own machine. So a dropper can be used as an intermediate between the hacker and a rootkit or a backdoor, which would give the hacker a good amount of leverage on the machine. Again, droppers are used primarily for stealth, and these mask the malicious payload, which makes anti-malware softwares uh, quite uh, this essentially uh, evades anti-malware softwares and fools them into believing that there's nothing wrong going on with the system, and it provides a lot of leverage for the attacker. And that's all for this video. If you have enjoyed it, leave your comments below and see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye.